What up, guys? The Bench Buddies are back with my final MLB Power Rankings of the year. Week 25, we finally made it to the end of the year, and we're getting crazy here in this one because I got the Reds moving up 11 spots after their dominant week. And yeah, that's right. I got my Tigers and the Texas Rangers moving down 7 spots as we enter the last week of the season. But before we do that, we got to talk about the standings. And the Blue Jays have clinched a playoff berth. Still, the AL East is up in the air there as they have a 2-game lead over the Yankees and a 5-game lead over the Red Sox. Obviously, anything can play out. The Blue Jays play the Red Sox to start the series or to start the week in the 3-game series. So that could be a huge one there, not only for Blue Jays and Red Sox, but also the Yankees as they're on the outside looking in. Then you got the AL Central, and the Tigers' historic collapse could mean not only do they not win the division, but also miss the playoffs as they play Cleveland, 3-game series in Cleveland to start the week, and the Tigers also get the Red Sox there, which could honestly be for the last wild card spot. And talk about the last wild card spot. Let's go to the AL West. Texas Rangers did everything they can to pretty much knock themselves out of the playoffs last week, going 0-6. And unfortunately, they're probably out of this thing unless, there is another collapse and the Rangers win every game this week. But the Mariners taking it to the Astros have a 3-game lead in the division. Obviously, they played last weekend, and the Mariners swept them to get that 3-game lead in Houston. And Seattle has been the hottest team in baseball here for these last few weeks, other than the Guardians. The National League is a little more set in stone as we have 4 teams clinching the playoffs. The Phillies clinched the NL East, Brewers clinched the NL Central, and the Dodgers have clinched a playoff berth. But the NL East is somehow, some way, going to end up with maybe only one team in the playoff, with the Mets collapsing as well here late. Marlins are turning it on. Who knows? They can make this thing interesting if they win out. You just never know at this point in the season. They still have a chance. Then you move to the NL Central. Brewers clinch the division, Cubs clinch the playoffs, and those Reds currently hold the tiebreaker for that last playoff spot over the Mets in that last wild card round. So those two teams are going to be fighting it out for the last wild card spot. And teams that are going to be fighting for another spot with those Reds are going to be the Padres and the or the Diamondbacks and the Giants. The Padres are the second wild card team in. More than likely, they're going to clinch here with one win on Tuesday or a loss from the Reds. They'll probably get in. But the Diamondbacks and Giants still have a chance to get in. The NL is going to be crazy this week. And, anything's up in the air at this point. And even the number one seed here in the NL is up for grabs between the Brewers and the Phillies. But we'll start with the teams that don't matter. And that's 30 through 26. Angels have a bad week, so they fall 3. Nationals fall 1, getting swept in against Atlanta at home. But they do win a series against the Mets. But I don't know, I'm just not really too high on the Nationals at this point. The only team really that you want to talk about here in this one is the Minnesota Twins. They can play spoiler in this one, and they can play against the Texas Rangers, knock them out, and go to Philly and maybe keep them from getting the number one seed. And then the Rockies, same thing. They could go to Seattle, sweep them, and give the Astros a chance to win the AL West, and then possibly knock the Giants out of the playoffs there. 21 through 25, you have the Atlanta Braves going 7-0 last week, 4 in Washington, 3 in Detroit. They get Washington again this week at home and Pittsburgh at home. Who knows? Maybe this Braves team wins out and they go 13-0 to close the year to redeem themselves for starting the season 0-9. 22, you got the Oakland A's, or now the Las Vegas A's next year. They get Houston, which could be a huge series there, could spoil little things. But this A's team is going to be scary next year as Nick Kurtz, Jacob Wilson, and that young core are looking pretty good entering 2026. The Marlins could do something crazy. They could go to Philly and win a series there. Let's say they win there and the Mets get swept. They could easily move over the Mets. The Mets just can't win 2 games here in their first series, and then that knocks the Marlins out of the playoffs. Orioles at 24 move back to sweeping the White Sox, win 1 of 4 against the Yankees at home. Have Tampa at home. Series doesn't mean anything. And then that Yankees series, they could possibly play spoiler there. And then the Pirates, they get the hottest team in baseball coming, and they go to the hottest team in baseball in Cincinnati Reds, and they could derail their whole season with just one little series here. 16 through 20, and we have some fringe playoff contenders, guys on the outside looking in, and that's those Rangers and Giants. Rangers were in prime position last week to not only get a wild card spot, but possibly secure themselves a better wild card spot, not the last spot. But what did they do? They went 0-6, and they get Minnesota this week, which they could easily sweep them to put their hat back in the ring. But they need a lot of help for that to happen because I think the Rangers are only one game away from getting eliminated if I think that's correct. The Rangers, kind of blew it right then and there, and they were average at best this year. That's why they're floating around 500. Royals, same thing, nothing to report there. They're just a disappointing season for them. The Giants, they had their chance last week to possibly get into the playoffs against some playoff teams, but they just couldn't get it done on the road against their divisional opponents. That's why they're moving down. Cardinals kind of had the same thing. They had a decent week, but it's just not going to be enough to vault them into the playoffs unless they can go 6-0 this week and hope that the Mets or the Reds just fall apart. Then the Rays, unfortunately, a disappointing season. More than likely, they'll probably somehow, some way end up 80 and 82, just like they always do. Then 11 through 15, 11 through 14 stay the same. Padres, Astros, Red Sox, and Mets all go 3-3 last week. The only one that was shocking, I guess you could say, was the Astros going 3-3. Sweep Texas, get Seattle, and a huge series, like I said, get swept at home. And they go to Sacramento to face the A's and the Angels to close it out. So they do have a favorable schedule here on the road if this team wants to make a playoff berth. And talking about making a playoff berth, that's going to be lucky for my Detroit Tigers. 0-6 last week. This team is 1-9 in their last 10. It has not looked good at all for the Detroit Tigers. And they still have a game lead over Cleveland, like I said, but this is where we're going to find out what this Tigers team is made of in the last week of the season. Yeah, you've blown the huge division lead and you've pretty much thrown away everything you worked for this last week of the season. And maybe they can go out and prove it against Cleveland on the road here. And then they have to go to Boston as well, which is going to be a very tough series. But they are lucky. Skubal starting Tuesday, and he is going to be on the bump on Sunday. So they do have two Skubal starts this week to close out the year, which Tigers fans I know can rejoice where hopefully they can win those two games. 6 through 10. And yeah, that's right. I got the Reds moving up 11 spots, going 6-1 last week, sweeping the Cubs at home, going into St. Louis and winning that series. And, I'm a little high on them because they're doing everything right at the right time. They get Pittsburgh at home, close it in Milwaukee. This Reds team could somehow, some way find their way into the playoffs over the Mets there. And that's why they're in my top 10 because they're playing some really good baseball right now. Same with the Diamondbacks, playing some really good baseball. Go 4-2 last week against the Giants at home, Phillies at home, which I'm surprised they took that series, and that's why they're entering my top 10. Now, the challenge in front of them is 3 games against the Dodgers, 3 in San Diego against the Padres, and it's a 3-game series for your playoff hopes at this point. So the playoffs start this week for the Diamondbacks as they got to at least go, I would say 4-2, probably have to get 5-1 if this team wants to make a playoffs, and that would be some story in itself. After trading away half of their team at the deadline, can find their way somehow still in the playoffs. The Cubs at 8 get swept in Cincinnati, and that's why they're down. Maybe you can make the case that they could be 8 or 9, and the Reds could be 8. But I just left it like this because they were a top 5 team all year. Um, the Mets, Cardinals this week can prove it. Get to hopefully this Cubs team can get to 90 wins before it's all said and done. And talking about 90 wins, you got the Toronto Blue Jays and the Milwaukee Brewers. And Brewers fall even have a winning week just because some teams are playing better, but they get San Diego and Cincinnati, so it's a little tune-up for them before they hit the playoffs against those possible NL playoff teams. Blue Jays go from 2-7 after a mediocre week at best, losing the series in Kansas City, splitting with the Rays. I just felt like you want to see these Blue Jays win those series, especially at this point in the season. They can always get right, though, possibly knock the Red Sox out of playoff contention, and then close it with the Tampa Bay Rays in the weekend series. 1 through 5, you may be surprised here on how it's going, but I got the Mariners at 1. This team is unstoppable at this point, playing some really good baseball. Early week series against the Rockies, close it with the Dodgers in town, and the Mariners could walk away with this division crown entering that Dodger series if they sweep the Rockies. Phillies at 2, good week for them, I would say 3-3 on the road in the Dodgers. You win that series, but then go to Arizona and lose that series. And, I was hoping they would get that series. They probably would have stayed at 1, but they get Miami and Minnesota this week. And I would be shocked if this team doesn't at least go 3-3, if not 4-2, just because, those teams are just a little lower than them. But Miami still has a chance for the playoffs, so they're going to get Miami's best this week. The Yankees at 3 go from 7-3, winning a series in Minnesota, winning a series in Baltimore. And these are series you have to win because, well, you're that wild card team right now, still looking for an AL East victory. But White Sox and Orioles again, we might be talking about the Yankees winning the AL East at this point next week as we enter the postseason. And I wouldn't be too shocked if it happened because they got a lot easier competition than those Blue Jays do. The Guardians, I mean, you got to give them credit here for what they are building in the month of September. 15-2 in their last 17 games and sweeping Detroit on the road to get those 3 games back. And Detroit's collapse, like I said, and winning the series 3 of 4 in Minnesota puts them a game behind as they play Detroit at home in a 3 game set. If you're the Guardians, if you can win 2 of 3 and control that tiebreaker, I believe it is. I think they have the tiebreaker, so they gotta win 2 of 3 and then do exactly what the Tigers do, and the division is theirs. But they still get Texas at home, and Texas can prove costly and play spoiler if they need to be. And then at 5, my last team in the rankings, staying at 5, are those Los Angeles Dodgers, and I think it's only fair to keep them here because, well, they went 1-2 against Philly at home, but they pretty much knocked the Giants out of the postseason with that series win taking 3 of 4. But they finish on the road, which none of these top 5 teams do besides the Dodgers. And they go to Arizona and Seattle, and 2 tough series to close out the year as those Padres are lurking for that NL West. But it would be almost a miracle, I think, if the Dodgers somehow, some way don't win the NL West at this point, even with the tough schedule in front of them. But that's going to be it for my power rankings for baseball, week 25. Check back next week as I'll be picking my playoff bracket and ranking all the teams from 12 to 1 on their chances to win the World Series. But until the next time, the Bench Buddies are out.